Hi, Karen.
Hello, Sue.
We're
So
gonna
good to see
talk.
you.
This is
Yes,
awesome.
it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Looking forward to
And
it.
you're what? You're in Bozeman, Montana?
Yes, and it has been bitterly cold. Lots of snow, bitterly cold.
What
30
what are
below
the
wind chill.
what are the shocking temperatures that you're dealing with?
30 below wind chill. Today it got up to 10 degrees for a while. It was the warmest it's been in 3 or 4 days. But it was the wind. We had snow drifts that we had to go through that were above the top of the fences. So but we have a big tractor with a blower, so it was okay. Yeah, it's fun. So,
How many
anyway.
blankets do the horses wear when it's like this?
Well, see, all the horses have many many thicknesses of blankets. So they have
Yeah.
lights, mids, heavies. So when it's just regularly cold, they're heavy, but now they're heavy with their mid on top.
Man, so are you,
outside.
I know it's tricky, like the horses that you have, they're not clipped, are they?
No,
So then it's really a lot of management, so they're not sweating, I'm guessing.
yes, but and then I check them, but even, if it's 30 below, they're not sweating with 2 blankets on.
No, but I mean, this is the art of the,
Oh, this
of the
is the
horse
art, yes.
management is that you're blanketing, it's really cold, you're getting these swings in temperature, and then all of a sudden, unless you're living like the blanket attendant, which you are, but I mean, it's not always possible,
Mhm.
is that it's tricky, I'm guessing, to know how many blankets and when, or do you do it by a thermometer, or how do you make that judgment?
So a lot of times we'll do it by the thermometer, but it depends on if there's wind. If there's no wind and it's sunny, then they go into a lighter blanket. But if it's really windy and that's when the wind chill goes down, then they can get more blankets. The key that we do is that I check them 4 times a day. Is just to be on top of it and pay attention. And certain horses, get hotter than other horses. It's just really about being aware, just
Yeah.
about really paying attention. And then we always are looking 1 or 2 days ahead to try to see where the temp's going. So we're ready. It's like, okay, it's going to warm up by morning on Wednesday. So maybe Tuesday nights, we'll take the other blanket off so they're not too warm by Wednesday morning. I personally, what I do is I'd rather that the horses were cold than hot. I think they do better in the cold than they do with the heat. So I'm more worried about them overheating with the blankets than I am about not having enough blankets on.
Now, I'm guessing that there's horses in that environment, not at your place, but that are in that environment that aren't even wearing blankets. Is that true?
There are horses when it got to 52 below wind chill, like last month. Well, actually, that was probably
52.
November, December, that not only did they not have blankets, but they had no shelter and they had no way to get out of the wind. But they survive. Horses do really well in the cold. They don't do as well in the heat, but they do really well in the cold.
That's the stuff though, that's good to know. Like, I mean, say something happens and the horses out there, like I had that horse come over to Florida from Florida, and it was a lot warmer, and it came over to me in Kentucky when it was cold.
Mhm.
And so trying to integrate her, but not have her get, you know what I mean? It's interesting to think about that in my head, that minus 52 degrees and they're out there finding a way. Now, was there another horse so at least they could be next to each other?
And most of them, there's actually, when they're in that situation, there's usually quite a few horses. And the key has always been that they're called hay burners for a reason, that when it's that cold, you just throw the hay to them. You just let them eat as much as they can. And that's what keeps them warm. So you just, what I worry about is horses that are in those situations and maybe they don't get an increase in hay, but they really need the hay. That's what keeps them warm. So you just throw it to them. I mean, you don't care how much they eat. You just put it out there,
But then when you're feeding them like that,
Mhm.
is it a particular type of hay that helps them to keep heat, or is it just eating?
Oh, it's just basically eating. It's just really the metabolic breakdown of the grasses and things. I mean, some people think that there's more energy in alfalfa. A lot of people think there's just more protein in alfalfa. I mean, there's different people who have different thoughts and ideas. definitely a high quality hay is what you would want. If you have a really low quality hay and it's that cold, then it is hard for them. But a lot of the hay, if the nitrogen is what makes it green, right? And it's the carbon that makes it the yellow. So if you have yellowed hay, you lost some of your nitrogen, which is for the protein, but you have the carbohydrates, which is the carbon. So they're, and that's what they're going to burn is the carbs, right? When it's really cold like that. So they do pretty well. They.
Does it
I
make a
find it hard.
difference? Like, do you feed them other stuff too? Like, grains, or, I mean, is there any thoughts around that? I've never dealt with temperatures like that, so it's fascinating.
If you do feed grain to your horses and you're set up and they're used to, getting grain, then yes, a lot of people will just add maybe even a little more grain at that time. But you probably wouldn't want a horse that hadn't been on any grain and then all of a sudden to give them a lot of grain. So it's just basic common sense. You just kind of
not common sense. That is the rules, Kara. Don't be messing with me on that. No common sense.
So, I mean, and there's a lot of things that people know. I mean, it would only be a rare, somebody who's really a beginner who maybe hadn't been through a lot. They should really look out and ask someone who's had those kind of winters. Like if you moved here from Florida with your horse who had no hair and hadn't grown hair in years or something, you would really want to ask around to see how this is going to go for the winter. Now, what a lot of people, if they don't ride their horses in the winter, they don't even blanket, because the horses, they grow a lot of hair and they stay pretty warm. They do well in the cold. We blanket the horses because we ride in the winter and we don't want them to sweat, because if they sweat with a lot of hair, then it takes forever for them to dry. And so then it's harder because they've been in a warmer barn and then you put them out in the cold. So most of the time when we blanket here, it's just because you're using them in the winter. And you're just trying to control how much hair they have and things like that.
So a big question. What about the water?
Water. Very first time ever, we had a water problem this time. But we have, we have automatic waters with heaters, and they work really well. They've been really well insulated. This time, I mean, we got 52 below and stuff. We didn't have any problem because it wasn't sustained that long. But this time we had, it was only 30 below, but the winds were like for hours and hours and hours without a break. And the waters were out in the wind. And we went out and I checked the waters 4 or 5 times a day just to make sure, because they've never not worked. And there they were empty, both of them. And we thought, oh no, the water broke. But what had happened, we figured out real quickly, was that so how the water works in the bowl, you have a bowl, because that's kind of water as we have. And then as the water fills into the bowl, then it gets heavier, then it turns it off, right? Because it has the switch. So the weight of it turns off the pump. So then as they drink, then it gets light, and then the pump comes on and fills the bowl again. So what had happened, because we have these mares that really like to splash around, is that they had drunk down, but they had splashed water up underneath the rim, which we couldn't really see, some ice. And so the ice froze in there so quickly, it was kept the bowl down. So then the water didn't fill because it thought it was full. So we went in and just undid the ice around the rim, and it filled right away. So nothing had frozen. Everything was working correctly. It's just that the weight of the ice was keeping the bowl down and it didn't fill. So then we were out there checking it all the time. And it's the very first time. We had it 3 times where we had to go out and get the ice off. But never before. We've had really bad storms and never before, but because things are changing, we now get the wind from the east. And all the water is on the west side of the barn, because the wind always came from the west. So all the stalls and everything on the west, so they don't get snow in them and stuff. And then the waters are on the west because they're protected from the wind. But now the wind's coming from the east.
Wow. So you've really noticed a difference. How many years have you been there?
Oh, this time, well, I grew up in Montana. So this time I've been back here in DeBozeman probably 12, 13 years again. So, but yeah, and it's changed since, well, we've always had really tough winters. I mean, that's what we know, we know how to do it, but it's, yeah, and they're long winters.
Are there horses out in the field that don't have automatic waters and stuff? I mean, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and usually then they'll have big tanks and they'll have a heater in the tank,
Okay.
and that keeps the water. Mhm.
What did they do before? You know, when people didn't have
Oh,
heaters?
before a lot of times there was always like there was a running creek that went through the pasture. They made sure, and then they would go out and chip the ice with the creek. I mean, I remember doing that, going out down to the creek and chipping with the ice and stuff like that. So running water is really important. Otherwise, they'll have hoses or something. And then I cannot tell you how many people empty hoses all winter long. And that's a huge, heavy job. And it's cold and you're out there because you fill up the tank and then you've got to empty all the hoses all the way back to wherever they were, where it starts. So it's invigorating.
So then basically in the days before, there was enough land. There usually were creeks involved and things. And now as we're making the spaces smaller and smaller, we have to kind of come up with these artificial systems because everybody doesn't have a creek running through their land. Right. Is that right?
And when I was out moving cattle, well, I lived on some different big, huge cattle ranches. And in the wintertime, we would go out and they didn't have access to water, but they did have windmills. I mean, that's what the windmills are for really in the beginning, right? And that the windmill would pump the water up from, down from a well into a big tank. So that, as through the winter, it would spin and then it would fill with water, but you had to go check it a lot because it could really freeze. So you had to go out and check that. So that was another way for them, how they got.
There was still a chipping away of ice then, even with the windmill.
It could be, sure.
Wow.
And horses are pretty good. I mean, if it's just a creek, I mean, and it's not, dangerous creek. I mean, horses will crack through the ice themselves if they can get down to it. They know how to use their feet, and they use their hooves and they crack the ice. I mean, so there's a lot of that. So things have definitely changed by having the horses so confined. Yes, things have changed, which maybe just because there was so much easy availability to electricity and things like that. Now this year, at all the other places, we've always had generators. And when we bought this place, we hadn't really gotten a generator, but we now put in 2 generators again, just so we don't have to worry about the water because, the power grids and things, everything's getting, with some of the storms and stuff that, so a lot of people have generators as backup. So they always have power so they can get the water to their horses.
Yeah, that would be a big deal. I mean, I think about that here even. I mean, it being this, not paying rent and then having somebody else take care of it. It's different all of a sudden when I have to be thinking my way through all of that. I know there was a moment in the first year, I was carrying water from my kitchen sink out to the barn because something froze or I forgot to undo a hose or I can't remember, it was something, but it's like, well, I think I need to upgrade from carrying buckets of water from my sink.
Yes. Right.
But we don't have weather like you do. So that's amazing, Karen.
Yes. And, and it usually only lasts for a week or so, and then it's like, today, well, then they tell you, like we were just so tired and so excited that they've said that at noon today it was going to be 20 degrees. We were so excited. It's like, oh, it's going to be over at noon today. We made it again, And at noon today it was 11 below and 0. It was 11 below and 0. It didn't quite get to 20 degrees. So the highest it got today was like 7, and now I think it's like 0 again. So it didn't quite. So we got another day before we can say, hallelujah.
But it's still interesting, friends over in California, they're getting snow in places they don't normally, or my cousin that's up in Spokane, it's -11. And so, I mean, don't you think it's harder on people that aren't ever really experiencing cold weather? Like, even though it's terrible for you, you have experience with it. I mean, if we threw you up in Fairbanks, Alaska or something, it'd be another story. But, the thing is you have experience, so you kind of know how it goes. Don't you think that helps, even though it's low, but you have experience?
Oh, I think it helps tremendously. Plus I grew up like this. So to me, it's just normal, right? It's just like, this is winter. This is what you do. This is how it works. And we see so many people, because so many people are, moving into this area anyway, that, and they're kind of shocked. They're like, like today we were, it took my husband 45 minutes to probably just, it took him 3-4 hours to plow just out to the mailbox. We have a long driveway, but we had 5-foot drifts. So that's what really shocks the people when they can't, not only can they, like we were walking out to the barn the first day because we couldn't even, it was blowing so hard you couldn't even get the snowblower out. It just would blow right into your face because the way the wind was going. And so we were like, up, it was up way over our thighs and we're trying to walk out to the barn, we're post-holing. We're just like, and people are like, but the fascinating thing to us is that we have a road out front so we can look at our windows from our our living room, and it's 30 below and you cannot barely see, and yet you see people driving really fast on the road, and and then the drifts are so bad they're going to hit it. It's just like, you're like, I hope they're okay. And when I was growing up in Montana, it was a great thing because there were so few people. There were like, it was less than, there was like 400,000 people when I was growing up. Now we just have 1 million in Montana. Montana is a very big state. And so everybody always waved. I mean, anytime you passed somebody in the car, no matter where you were, you acknowledge that. So people would go by and sometimes it was just a finger, or sometimes they would just lift their hat or something, but everybody waved. And the idea is that if anybody needed you, like, and you were always kind to your neighbor, like you didn't really get upset with your neighbor if their dog came into your yard too much. I mean, you might say something very kindly, but you really needed your neighbors, because in the wintertime, you didn't want your neighbor to be upset with you and drive past you when you were in the ditch or something. So people here had a whole different way of really appreciating each other because they needed each other. And there was a lot of decorum and there was a lot of respect that you just really had to think about things, because you could be way out there, 30 miles out there, and the only car to go by the whole day might be your neighbor, and you really wanted to be on good terms with them.
Interesting.
It's just an interesting, so to have seen that change in my lifetime has been quite different.
But being out here in rural Kentucky, everybody does what you're saying.
They say they
Yep.
do the wave.
Everybody that passes you. I mean, not when I get closer to a city, but
right.
In my rural drive or going to, one of the cities that are closer, is that everybody does some waving, or like you said, the finger, not the finger, but
no, just
with the finger or something off the steering wheel, right?
Yes,
so that's interesting to realize that. It kind of, I have lived in other countries where people, acknowledged you. So it wasn't completely shocking, but it was interesting to be in the United States with that going on.
Yeah. So it was a different time, but in the winter time, I mean, it lasts like where I'm at, because I'm in the mountains in Montana. It's 6 months. And so it's a very long time, and so people are they get pretty used to it. They adapt pretty fast because you just have to do it every day. So you figure it out pretty quick.
So in the history though, I guess if you're a rancher and cows are out eating and grazing and being cows, the 6 month, it doesn't really, I mean, it's a lot of work, but it doesn't really matter because cows are just being cows.
No, they have to be fed.
Well, I mean, like now, if you were, say, a bicyclist trying to live in Bozeman and you had to train indoors for 6 months out of the year, it's maybe different for you than if you know what I mean? I'm not minimizing the cattle, but with the cows growing and living outside, was it more palatable in a way to have that extreme weather?
Okay, so I'm a little confused because the cows have to be fed just like horses every day, even in the pastures and things, even if they're way out in the mountains. I used to go out 5 miles each way with pack horses, and we hauled in sweet cake. This is called sweet cake. And there's these big blocks, kind of like the blocks of salt that you get, but you'd haul those in. And so they would have that extra energy that they would need because it got, well, that's good. That's something to learn, something to remember. So you would really have to, the problem is there's so much snow, it gets so deep that you really have to be able to get out to the cows. Now, a lot of people, what they do is it's just kind of like, in Europe, they take the cows to the mountains in the summer, and then they bring them down to the lowlands in the winter.
Okay.
So there's less snow, and then they just feed, and most people anymore, they used to feed with a team. When I was growing up, there was a lot of teams, a lot of flat wagons that would put on all the hay, and they would go out and then they just push the hay off as the team walked along. It was really kind of quite romantic. I actually quite liked it. Can I go out? I sort of like that part. But now, of course, they just take the truck out and then they just pull the hay. And then of course, then the round bales came in, and then now they just go out and they throw out, they take the tractor out and just throw a round bale, and the round bale lasts quite a while. So there's not as much hand feeding as there used to be. So again, there's just been a different development of that.
So were the round bales an advent of tractors?
So it takes a huge tractor to do a round bale. So
Okay,
actually you can
so
get,
that was
there are
never,
these-
that was only something as a result of tractors, then they're always
Yes.
square before.
well, okay, so square bales are smaller. I mean, you can't get up to 100 pounds, maybe 120 pounds. Sometimes they'll have 3 wire
Yeah.
bales. And things like that. So you can get some bigger bales. But what they used to do, I mean, when it was back with the horses, it was all loose hay, right? They didn't even put wire or baling twine or anything around the hay. It was all loose. So they would just take it out of the loft of the barn, throw it down on the wagon, and then they would take it out. Then
Oh, good one.
right, so there was
Yeah.
baled, okay, and then then the
Okay.
smaller bales came along with the smaller tractors, and then as the tractors got bigger, then the bales got bigger, and now of course there's this kind of like this spoke that just goes into the bale. They sort of stab it into the bale and pick that up, and then they can take it out. And now there's actually even they can do that, put it on the back of trucks, and then the trucks can go and back of a pickup and can slide off. So now there's different ways to feed more efficiently, because it's hard. It's hard work. And
I just got square bales from Kansas, and they're over 1,000 pounds each.
Wow. Oh yeah. So you can get the really, yes, you can get
It
those.
was the first time I've seen square bales that I've dealt with. We
Right.
had them in Colorado,
Right.
that they baled in square bales.
Square bales,
But
yeah.
it was just interesting,
Right, but it
they're
takes a
not,
tractor.
they're not convenient.
Pardon? They're not convenient.
I moved, I could only get it so far, and then because of the way the spike went in, the hay spike, it broke on the string because of the weight. So I ended up having to move each one flake at a time in my wheelbarrow. And then I got them stacked up. It was, I mean, this is it, right? Because it broke in the barn aisle, so I didn't get it to its destination. But it's amazing. It was just appreciating how heavy one flake is out of something like that, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, yes. And that's the one thing that, like in Montana, especially for the horse people, is that since most women, it's a lot of women who are feeding their horses, that the size of the bales were getting to where we just couldn't do it, and people didn't really if you just have 1 or 2 horses, you don't want to do a hay bale because big round bale, because that goes bad over time if it's just out in the elements for too long and things like that. And then you'd have to have a tractor and stuff. So here it's been really hard because the bales keep getting heavier, and people really, women really sort of like the 60, 70 pound bale. And so there's really quite a premium that they'll put on those bales, because that's kind of like the old equipment. And so that equipment's kind of falling apart. And so you talk to the farmers and like, we don't like it that we have to do these 60 pound bales for you. And it's like, well, we don't like to feed 100 pound bales.
Oh, that's interesting, because growing up in California, we always had 3 wire bales.
Oh, really?
Always. And so I remember I think I was 10 when I got my first horse, and my dad would help me, but we would be stacking hay bales. And I got to where when I was, 10, 12 years old, I couldn't lift them, but I could roll them. Right. Roll them places.
Yeah.
But then coming out here, all of a sudden I've got 2 string bales again, and they are great. They are amazing. They're so simple.
They're so simple. Yes.
But then the thing is, though, where you are you dealing with irrigated fields? Because one thing here, not having irrigated fields, it seems like it's so tricky with the between the rain and the humidity, those smaller bales are even harder to get right.
Because of the mold or what?
because of the moisture. So they even, like, I'm learning that they stack them a certain way so that
right.
the air can dry in them and they vent, they kind of vent. So, I mean, I never had to think about hay stacking strategy. It was
Yes.
more like stack the hay so the bale, it doesn't fall over. But
Right.
here, all of a sudden, there's like this whole strategy
Mhm.
about how hay can dry and this, and I mean, it's fascinating.
That is fascinating because Montana's dry. I mean, we have snow and things, but the humidity a lot of times is 18-20%. I mean, it's extremely dry in Montana. So we don't ever worry about the mold. But I remember when I was really riding dressage that I thought, well, maybe I'd like to move to Wellington, because it was the Mecca, dressage Mecca, and I was competing at that time. I thought, well, maybe I should, look into Wellington. And I was talking to someone and they said, but you can only buy just a few bales at a time because we have to have it shipped in all the time because it molds just within days.
Wow.
And so they said that the hay, you just get little bits at a time because it just molds. And I was like, wow. And then they started talking about, some skin problems the horses have because of the humidity. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna hang out where I just thought, wow, that's a lot.
I have to say, I'm putting the horses in the barn more than I ever thought I would because of giving their feet a chance to dry because of the amount of moisture that's here. And also in stewarding the land, I'm trying to, not have the land chewed up all the time too. So it's been, a whole different set of circumstances. Now that's interesting about the hay because I have a friend that lives in Wellington right now, and she had asked me about researching if there was some hay from Kentucky that they could take a load into Florida. So I wonder what they would do then for storage. I'll have to ask her. I'm curious about
her. That's curious. Yeah. it was just some of those things that you find out that you don't even think about. And then you come to realize how that is.
Yeah, because she has like 20 something horses for sale.
Wow.
I mean, not for sale, but they're in training. And so you couldn't just do a bale or two, could you? Right.
But on the other hand, if but you'd be probably going through it pretty fast. You'd be going through it pretty fast. So,
but I wonder if there's even I know I'm looking into one of those, they call them the big ass fans, they're giant fans. And you wonder about all of that, like down there, if they have to put fans on their hay or, just crazy stuff, right?
It's just different. Yeah.
I know here they talk about barn fires, and I was aware of that as a kid, but not maybe as much as it could happen here.
Yes, and I know that when I lived in northern Idaho, it wasn't so bad in eastern Washington, but we were always worried. We always would hear about the hay fires in the barns in western Washington because that was a problem. That they just combust. They would just boom. There's a hay fire. So I mean, it's fascinating because some of these things we're just talking some really sort of basic care, and there's still a lot of art to it.
Oh boy,
there's been a lot of wisdom through all the centuries that bring us to this place, and it's kind of fascinating to just look to see, like you were mentioning about, what did they do in the older days, and to sit here just to sort of see that it depends on where you're at, how different it is, what your needs are. When I've been thinking maybe moving where it's not maybe snow 6 months of the year and moving closer to Portland or to Seattle. And I've been really thinking about all the moisture. And I've been really looking for land that was actually sloped just a little bit, not too much, so it wouldn't get torn up by the horses, but not so flat that I had to worry that there was no drainage. And yeah, so there's just a lot to think about when you're trying to find a good spot, a good environment.
Well, and too, when I was living for a short time in Bend, Oregon, they had big time hay brokers there, and they were literally sending hay to Saudi Arabia. Wow. And so again, think about that in the equation, people, and Japan, right? That they're flying and buying hay. So, I mean, it's just so different. It kind of made me think when you said, oh, the hay was loose. And I'm like, wow. That's a whole nother generation, isn't it? Because even, when I went and I did an internship out of the university in Hungary, that was the first time, it was 1987. it was the first time that I'd ever been around round bales.
Mm,
So it's kind of ironic now I've got round bales again, but that training I had in Hungary prepared me for it.
mhm.
And
Ah,
they, so it's just sort of fun how all these dots, connected to different moments, right?
right, yes,
I actually
yes.
like the round bales, but it's work
Oh,
for
it's
me to
work.
take my
It's
pitchfork
work.
and be digging around and dragging a big section down the barn aisle. And, I mean, it's work. It's
It's
not,
work. It's
it's its
work.
own fitness program, right?
Yes, right, and that's how I looked at it, like, this is my fitness program. I go out there 4 times a day, maybe I do 6 wheelbarrows a day, I get a lot of help when it's really cold, but it's
Yeah,
like, wow, I'm out there. But, and also it gets me outside. I do love it.
yeah,
And it's wonderful to just go out and to be with the horses and to be with them and just be around them and not just working with them, but also just seeing how they're living and what they do and how they interact.
yeah.
And so there's everything has its light side, and then everything is, the other side, and we
Well,
can talk
it's
about
just too
cold,
the
but
joy of seeing the weather, right?
yes,
Of just experiencing the weather and all the little things. We literally, it's crazy. You're having that weather, and we had 76-degree weather yesterday. And so then, you're looking at the trees like, wait a minute, you guys, don't get any ideas like you're gonna start growing leaves and
yeah,
doing stuff, right? Because
yes.
it's gotta be confusing.
Oh, it is. They say that cherry blossoms are already started in Washington, DC 6 weeks early,
6
know.
weeks, wow.
Mhm,
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts, isn't it?
mhm. It's just things are shifting and changing a bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I do think that just being outside, like one of the things, so like I have to go out now. I'm gonna have to get off because I have to go feed
yeah,
the late night shift. But every night, because it's in Montana and there's not much light pollution, I can see the stars when it's a clear night. And I've just been looking at Orion every night, and then pretty soon Orion's, he was here and now it's over here and now it's over there. And there's something about just the rhythms, to get into those rhythms of just, and the quietness and the stillness and just being there, and then just being, there's nothing, it's kind of one of the things that I love, like you get the horses and they start to eat, and then they start to blow a little bit and they start to make some noises, or they nicker because you're coming into the barn, and it's, and you put the lights on in the barn and it's cheery, and then you go out and there's beautiful stars in the night. So it has its pluses, plus
yeah.
sides.
And they
Yeah.
always, it's such a wonderful thing. I mean, they appreciate having an attendant that is doing things, right? I mean, it
Yes.
doesn't matter. Sometimes I fall asleep on the couch and I wander out there at odd hours, and they're always happy to see what's happening and somebody showing up, you know.
Yes.
So it's fun, being really a part of their herd in a sense, right?
Oh, it is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just, yeah. And then, and also, there's also, when you go out at night and stuff, there's just this calmness, this quietness, this stillness that's just sort of, you get another layer of awareness.
Yeah.
So I guess on that note, I should probably go attend.
Yay! Cool stuff.
Yes,
Awesome.
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
It's just good to connect, good to chat about, things I haven't thought about the hay bales in a long time. So that's good. So it's just fun to talk about all that. So thank you, Sue,
Yeah, it's
for that
great.
interaction. Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom through the years and the ages, and to respect that and to honor that wisdom that's another thing. That's the gift from the past.
Well, and it's interesting too with our experiences of travel, and you know what I mean, and witnessing all of that, and it's just fantastic.
Mhm.
I
So-
mean, I'm guessing that when you were out in your tent with elephants, you weren't thinking hay bales.
No,
But,
I wasn't thinking hay bales.
No, but then when I did the riding safari,
Mhm.
they had to ship in a hay and do all that. So,
Mhm.
again, and the links people go to have horses in places that maybe aren't natural, and
Mhm.
how they work with it, right? I mean, of course, there were zebras and everything grazing, but it's not sustainable for the horses when they're in paddocks, because they're probably like you had, they had to have the horses in paddocks
Oh,
because of
yes.
the lions that were roaming around. So you
And
can't have
lions,
horses out just grazing. Of course, you have that. I'm sure you have some of that where you are. When we were
A
in
little bit.
Colorado, we had bears and
Mhm.
mountain lions
The
and
mountain
things
lion.
show up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it was the snakes that when I was in Zambia, they had to bring the horses in at night, really for the snakes.
Oh,
Poisonous snake.
interesting. You like the boa constrictors?
No, they were poisonous snakes. I can't even think. There was a big. I know they were big because I saw one. Yeah, but they had a lot of really big poisonous snakes. So they would say, and then I mean, I was kind of asking like around the doors and everything around all the stalls and everything. I mean, it was really secure and tight.
Mm.
And they had to step over. And I said, so what, I just thought maybe it was to keep the hay in or this, the shavings in or something. And they said, oh no, we really tighten it up at night for the snakes.
Wow.
So I mean, all these things I wouldn't, and that was the most interesting thing is like, somebody kept asking, I was in Zambia and I was working with some conservationists and somebody kept saying, well, why don't you do some clinics here? And I said, well, there's a tsetse fly and stuff. There's no horses in Zambia. And they said, oh, that's just over, in that one spot. There are thousands of horses in Zambia and they all do dressage and they all do jumping and they all do polo cross. And, oh, they would love to have you come and do clinics. And so then I started doing clinics in Zambia and it was a whole nother world. I didn't even think it existed. And it was like, then I started doing clinics in South Africa and Botswana. And it's like, there's horses everywhere. And I went to see the elephants and then I ended up, working with the horses, but it was great. It was great fun.
Yeah, they have a whole world because I know the woman that ran the safaris, she competed she was an FEI dressage rider and she trailered to get lessons and, just like we would do anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, it's so fun. Okay.
Anyway, well, I know you got to feed horses and I should go check on my group too, but great. And the thing is, it's so cool just to talk about whatever topic relative to horses, right?
Sure. Yeah, just to have a chat because again, we went down some old memories that are just really actually quite special. So thank you.
All right.
All right. Till next time.
Yeah. Night, Karen.
Good night.